Read 'em and weep. Shining Armor smiled. Tipping back the hat of his sheriff's costume, he spread 5 cards on the table, an impressive full house comprised of 3 kings and 2 nines. One of the other guards at the table groaned in defeat, while the remaining 3 smiled at their own wisdom to fold early. While the annual Nightmare Night celebration in the castle was a time-honored tradition, another tradition was the party held in the guard barracks. The decorations were simpler, the food was a potluck buffet, and the music came from a vinyl record. It was far from cultured, but it was a tradition many of the guards wouldn't trade for even the fanciest of castle soirees. Though he was now the prince of the Crystal Empire, Shining was still welcome amongst those that he had once been comrades in arms with, even if he was winning at poker. A prince living in a castle shouldn't be taking money from hard-working guards like us. One of the other ponies at the table joked as she began to shuffle cards. I can't help it if I'm getting good hooves and you aren't smart enough to fold. He laughed before the sound of a ringing bell tower rose above the clamor of the party. And it looks like I'm going to be ending tonight with a profit. The guards around the room put away the unreasonable parts of their costumes, from props to oversized hats, and began grabbing their gear. The guards at the poker table got up as well, changing out the money in the pot for what chips they had left. The one that had been dealing left the deck of cards in the center of the table as she chuckled. Why stop now? Why don't you just stay and try to take the afternoon shift bits too? Shining shook his head, heading for the door. No, I promised Cadence I'd come join the castle party when the guards changed shift. Thanks for the game, though. It was an enriching experience. That joke hasn't gotten any funnier since last year. One of the guards shouted at Shining as he stepped out of the barracks. The night had an invigorating chill to it, and Shining breathed it in with a smile. He then began walking the path that led from the barracks, which were tucked away next to an exterior wall, to the castle's main entrance. It was hard to ask for a better night for such spooky festivities. The moon was full, there wasn't a cloud in the sky to mar the beauty of the stars. It was all made that much sweeter by the jingle of bits in his pocket. Yes, perhaps the winnings were a bit wasted on him. The monetary value, however, couldn't compare to the simple satisfaction of beating other big-talking soldiers in cards. He had been on the losing end of that very same poker table enough times to appreciate the victory for its sentimental reasons. Shining reached the castle gates, stepping into the warm light spilling from the open doors. He'd tell Cadence about how the poker game went later. At the moment, he turned his head to the right as he reached the top of the front steps, intending to smile and nod to the guard standing watch there. Yet there was no guard there, and upon looking left, Shining saw the other guard, who was supposed to be stationed at the door, was also absent. Knowledge and experience he possessed as previous captain of the guard rushed to Shining's head. The eyes moved around the room. He looked to each place in the foyer where a guard was supposed to be standing, and each one was empty. The whole room was empty. Not a soul could be seen. Breaking his stride, Shining trotted through the castle, heading to the ballroom where the party was being held. With each step he took, his concerns only grew. He saw no guards, no party guests, no servants. It was like the whole castle had gone out for ice cream. Such a thing would usually have been ridiculous, but with Discord it was not impossible. Nor was it impossible that Discord had done something to the party to try and begin a new reign of chaos over Equestria. His pace increased to a gallop. Shining Armor raced through the last few hallways, and he built up a burst of magic, holding the power in his horn until he reached the doors to the ballroom. He then unleashed it, causing the doors to swing open with a clatter before he raced into the room. The ballroom was decorated with the finest fashion. He saw the spiderwebs on the ceiling for the arachnid servants, and instruments for the band lay waiting to be played. The room was ready and willing to continue the party, with a lack of living beings to enjoy the festivities. There was no sign of any pony. Twilight did not know how long she had been unconscious. It could have been as short as minutes, or as long as hours. She came back to the world, her head felt like it was filling with bubbles. Her thoughts were light, floating and bumping against one another without rhyme or reason. Slowly, her thoughts began to connect as she raised her head from the floor. Twilight remembered the party, the woods, the castle, then... Celestia! Scrambling to her hooves, Twilight stumbled in circles like a dog chasing its tail. She expected to find a horrible bite mark or that she was missing a limb. She went down into a mental checklist for ascertaining her level of bodily harm, and did it again just to be sure. But with each check off of her mental list, a small portion of her panic subsided until she was able to breathe a sigh of relief. Minus a little dirt that there was here and there on her fur, she was physically unharmed. But this assurance sent Twilight's mind chugging back down to its previous train of thought. She had been saved by Luna, but where was the Princess of the Night? To answer her own question, Twilight began to soak in her surroundings. It was a guest bedroom of the castle, likely the same castle she had been in when she'd passed out. The room itself was finely furnished. The piece of furniture directly before Twilight was a vanity carved from fine wood and decorated with golden inlay. It was a beautiful piece of craftsmanship, if not for one flaw. The vanity's mirror had been destroyed. The trinity of wooden frame before Twilight clung to a few lingering shards of glass, and the top of the vanity was littered with small shards and dust. Where the rest of the mirror's pieces had gone, Twilight didn't know. She began to crane her neck, thinking perhaps some had fallen behind the vanity. But it was then she noticed something. It was a flick of motion reflected in one of the mirror's remaining shards. Turning around, she expected to see Celestia or some monster standing behind her, ready to pounce. But instead, what Twilight saw caused a wave of relief to roll over her, like cool water on a hot day. Laying on the guest bed, eyes closed and breathing calm, was Luna. "Princess Luna," Twilight said, rushing to the side of the bed. "I'm so thankful to see you. What's going on? What happened to Princess Celestia? What is—" Twilight fell quiet, tilting her head to one side as she arched an eyebrow in confusion. "Are you sleeping?" Luna offered no words in reply. Her breathing remained constant. She slept peacefully, as if the dangers of the chaos that lay beyond the door were just as distant as nightmare. Twilight shifted anxiously on her hooves, unsure about how to proceed. She wanted to wake Luna up, but what if the princess had a good reason for being asleep? What that reason might be escaped her at the moment, but Twilight didn't have any cause to disturb the princess. What she was worried about was Celestia. Surely Luna knew what happened to her sister. Her mind bounced back and forth. Her hoof extended and retracted in time with her thoughts. She debated the wisdom of waking the princess. Each time she reached out, her hoof gave closer to touching Luna's shoulder. Each time she pulled her hoof back. She did it faster than before. It was an accident that finally made Twilight's decision for her. As she withdrew her hoof once more, it nicked part of Luna's foreleg. This caused the princess to stir, and she slowly opened her eyes. "Twilight Sparkle, is that you?" she whispered. "I'm sorry. I didn't know if I should wake you." "No, it is all right. I cannot remain awake for long." "Why? What's going on?" Twilight asked. "What happened to Princess Celestia?" Luna sat up, using a hoof to point. "Look, in the vanity's top drawer. I wrote some quick notes." The princess winced, as if she had been overcome with a painful headache. She promptly laid back down. "They aren't much, but I know you can put a stop to Discord's game. Just take to heart what I wrote and abide by the rules. It is your only hope." "What? Discord? But what's going on? Why can't you just—" Twilight's questions came too late. Luna was already back asleep, the lines of pain disappearing from her face as the peace of dreams enveloped her. Twilight watched the princess sleep for a few moments, trying to piece together for herself what was going on. She then turned her head and looked at the long drawer in the center. Twilight used her magic to open all three of the top drawers. They were all empty except for a single piece of paper in the center drawer. Twilight recognized Luna's cursive upon the page, and hastily read the note, soaking in every line. The creak of hinges once more broke the silence of the hallway. The darkness beyond slipped back from the glow of the light spell that seeped through the growing cracks in the doorway. Twilight peeked through, straining to hear the sight. Only she was believed the hallway beyond to be empty did she dare to open the door. It was then a 10-step process she had devised for herself. Step 1. Crack the door open and check for danger in the next room. Step 2. Stick her nose through the door and check for danger. Step 3. Put half of her head through the door and check for danger. Eventually, upon completion of Step 10, Twilight was on the other side of the door, her search through the castle ready to continue. Luna's note had explained some information in vagaries and rules. It had obviously been written quickly, as if spending a single moment to write something more detailed posed a great risk. Few of the rules certainly gave that impression. Rule 2. Do not wake the ponies spread throughout the castle. Rule 5. Do not wake Princess Luna unless it's necessary. Twilight's mind grappled for some reason for these rules, beyond the most obvious that she was already experiencing herself. To wake the ponies in the halls was to begin some form of transformation. But what was the cause of the transformation? Luna's note had placed blame on Discord for the present situation, that it was one of his games. Luna had even written down a riddle given by Discord, but Twilight still needed a chance to wrap her brain around the twisted rhyme. In the meantime, she had Luna's notes and one goal, which provided her with a mental security blanket against the dark unknown of the castle. The rules gave her a way to stay safe. The goal gave her something to do, something to try and complete, so she wasn't just sitting around waiting for a rescue that might not come. The goal was simple. Find the 3 lights placed throughout the castle and snuff them, and that would end Discord's game. So far, however, Twilight had not found anything she would describe as a light, or at least a light unique enough to be a set of 3. Even more unsettling was the castle's look of even normal lights. She had doubled back along her previous path to resume her systematic search. She should have been greeted by the illuminations from the candles, torches, and lanterns that had lit while performing her original search. But no such warm welcome existed. Even when she got back in the foyer, she found it as dark as the moment she had come inside, as if she had never been through there in the first place. Still, Twilight tried to focus. Keeping the castle well lit was not part of the rules for survival Luna had written. Being in the dark also gave her a better chance of seeing the lights. Perfect darkness, it was said a pony could see the glow of a single candle from over 3 miles away. And after what felt like an hour of searching, Twilight saw a flicker in the distance. She was in one of the higher floors of the castle, where a guest bedroom with the lower areas became offices, studies, and other more personal rooms. It reminded her of Canterlot Castle, in the wings that were Princess Luna and Celestia's private quarters. Twilight had a pause. The hallway that stood before her, spreading her from the light at the far end, felt far more menacing than any other corridor she'd seen in Canterlot Castle. It was also longer than it should have been when compared to the rest of the corridors. It was all illogical, evidence that she was a player and was likely the darkest game Discord had ever created. Paced on the threshold of the hallway, Twilight had to shore up her courage. She recited the rules Luna had given her, as if they were a protective mantra that would drive away evil. She went through the list of rules twice, and only then did she take her first step forward. Immediately, the chill in the air of the hallway hit Twilight, making her shiver and ruffle her wings. It was like she had stepped out of her warm, cozy library into the bitter cold of a sub-zero winter storm. Small, cloud-like puffs of hot breath escaped her lips with each exhale. The only mercy she had was the rug that ran the length of the corridor, and provided a barrier between her and the stone floor, which was probably cold enough to freeze her hooves off. Things only grew colder the further in she went down the hallway. She began to see frost clinging to the walls, and the chill began to sink deeper into her body. Twilight's mind began to slip away from the mantra of the rules to everything she would give away to have a scarf and earmuffs. She would give away her complete collection of daring-do books. She'd give away the very expensive scientific equipment she kept in the library's basement. She'd even give away her crown, as long as she got to remove the element of harmony before Hoof. Halfway down the hall, the frost on the walls was becoming small, jutting spires of ice. It made the hallway look as if it had been lined with teeth, and that Twilight was a willing morsel of food, heading for the stomach. Her ears and hooves were beginning to grow numb. Otherwise, she may have noticed the sticky sensation on the rug. Then the silence broke. Little to no warning, the ice around her made cracking noises, pops and groans as different spires of ice jostled against one another for dominance. Twilight also heard something else, something that made her glance over her shoulder. It was a tinkling that came and went, like cubes of ice falling into an empty glass. It was that sound that moved behind her, shuffling from the floor to the walls to the ceiling and back down. She was almost sure it sounded like the steps of some creature. The urge to turn around was like a marionette string tied to her body and head. Her fear pulled her, trying to get her to go back, but the desire came too late. She had reached the end of the hallway. It had become an icy tunnel from ceiling to floor, and lay beyond a cavern. A cavern marked with the frozen furnishings of a royal bath. All the warmth that the bath chamber might have had was robbed by the chill in the air and the ice. Twilight could see a tub, easily large enough for several ponies, frozen over like a pristine pond. The sink had overflown, creating an icy waterfall that pooled and spread across the floor. The room also looked much larger than it should, the furnishings insufficient for the amount of space. But where the furnishing was lacking, spires of ice filled the gaps. On the walls, the ceilings, and the floor, they stood everywhere. To Twilight, it felt like each one was watching her like a silent sentinel. Their shape was uncommon. Ice tended to freeze in a unique rhyme or reason, but all the spires she saw were very geometric. They looked like crystals. Fluttering her wings, Twilight tried to warm herself as she stood and took a few tentative steps into the bath chamber. She looked around anxiously at first, the foreboding feeling in her gut assuring her that she'd found something wrong or dangerous. But as she looked, the tenseness in her breathing began to fade as she took in the beauty of the room. It was the same kind of beauty held by a brisk winter day after a fresh snow, when the world outside is blanketed with snow. It looked pure and pristine. Still, after shivering violently to try and shake off the cold, Twilight tried to find the light she had seen. She retraced her steps to the doorway and looked in. She saw the orange light again, but now saw only a reflection. A spire of ice with its flat, crystalline surface was acting like a mirror. Twilight approached the spire. Putting her hoof on the surface, she began to shift it around slowly, trying to figure the angle the light was reflecting from. She stepped to the right, making the light disappear from the mirror like a surface. It now reflected the overflowing sinks. Another step, and Twilight was face to face with the mirror, clearly seeing her own reflection. She looked like she was about to freeze herself over, but her own visage wasn't what she seeked to find in the icy mirror. Another 2 steps, and finally the image was on the entrance doorway, came into view. She could see the doorway in the reflection. That meant that she was facing the surface from the same angle the light was. So she turned around and looked to the far wall of the room. There, resting within a deep square hole in the wall, was the orange light. Twilight looked to it with a smile, happy to know she would soon depart the frigid chambers. She trotted forward, her magic already reaching out to grasp the light and draw it from its hiding place. However, her concentration broke when she ran into something. It was icy and stringy, and it clung to her. She tossed her head, coughed, shouted, and stumbled back before slipping on the ice near the sinks. She barely managed to catch herself before she tumbled to the floor. Twilight then cast a levitation spell, pulling away what clung to her face and holding it so that she could get a look at it. It was a spider's web, cold and shimmering as if made of ice. Twilight struggled to calm her breathing, her voice trembling from both the cold and her fear. She began to hear the sound again, the sound of ice hitting a glass. It came in through the door, and then slipped up above her. She almost didn't dare to look. She couldn't bring herself to even glance upward as the sound continued. Then, as abruptly as it had started, the sound stopped, halting directly above Twilight's head. Twilight's breathing became more erratic, and her wings fluttered with an overwhelming desire to carry Twilight out the door and away. She shouldn't look. She should just run. That was Luna's first rule. If she encountered anything dangerous, she was supposed to run. But the light was so close. She could levitate it from here. She couldn't decide whether to go forward or to go back. She knew too little about what was going on. She needed to know more to make a decision, and to know more she had to know what was above her. She had to look. She just had to tilt her head back a little and look. And she did that. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw what loomed above her. The size of a buffalo, at least. It looked like a creature made of ice. A thick, heavy body with 8 thin, tiny legs that held it against the ceiling. 3 body parts. 1 large abdomen of translucent ice, connected to an equally translucent cephalothorax. In all, it was a frighteningly sized spider. But there was something else. Within the cephalothorax was a large pink mass, and from the front of the spider, where its eyes and fangs should have been, poked a head. True, spiders had no head like a pony, but there was no denying what Twilight saw. That spider had a head, a pink-furred head with a long mane comprised of 3 colors: magenta, purple, and yellow. Cadence? That small utterance from Twilight's lips caused the spider to shift. It raised and lowered its few legs, while its head turned slowly, revealing to Twilight the fact that she dreadfully feared. The pink mass frozen within the spider was Cadence. It was her head that was poking out from the front, but not because she was being eaten by the spider. 8 eyes now dotted Cadence's brow, each looking to Twilight with primal hunger. Her mouth was filled with long, razor teeth, an eternal, frightening smile in every way that looked like the one on Celestia's face. Cadence was no victim of the spider. She was the spider. A low hiss was Twilight's only warning before Cadence dropped from the ceiling, ear-splitting roar accompanying her fall. Twilight screamed, her magic surging as she teleported away, but it wasn't far. She reappeared on a surface of the bath's frozen tub. Her hooves slid, but Twilight made her struggle to stay upright as silent as possible. Cadence was facing the other direction, legs clattering against the floor and hisses escaping her deformed mouth as she looked beneath her. Twilight had seconds before she would be seen, and the doorway out of the room stood unguarded. She could leap and run for it. The doorframe was too narrow for Cadence to follow quickly. But in the peripheral of her vision, Twilight also saw the light. It was her goal, the thing that would put an end to Discord's game. If she left without snuffing it, then she would likely have to come back and face Cadence again. Escape for the moment, or act to end Discord's game. The 2 choices each pulled and called to Twilight, the pros and cons of each decision waging on her mind. She raised a hoof to take a step, still unsure of what her decision was, but knowing she had to start moving nonetheless. She placed the hoof on the edge of the tub, but it slipped away. She stumbled, she yelped, and it was all over. In a moment, Cadence attacked, raising her abdomen and launching a surge of icy, silken threads. Twilight was soon wrapped in the webs, yelps of panic escaping her throat as she struggled to free herself. She broke some of the threads, but for each one she snapped, Cadence replaced it with 10 more. She was losing sight of the bath chamber, becoming wrapped entirely in webs. The darkness began to close in, familiar darkness. It was so close. The walls. She couldn't breathe. It was like a tomb, like a coffin. The threads were getting tighter. They were crushing the life from her. She struggled, but she couldn't get free. The walls were closing in. She had to get away. She couldn't be buried and forgotten. She wouldn't be left alone to die. No! In a single, desperate act of magic, Twilight unleashed a heat spell. She could feel her horns scorching the fringes of her mane, but the heat she unleashed was salvation. The webbing melted away while Cadence hissed and stumbled back from the heat. Gasping and Fighting free of the cocoon, Twilight clambered back to her hooves. She kept up the heat spell, spreading it further. Cadence continued to hiss and wave her legs, some of which were beginning to melt. "Get back!" Twilight shouted, seeing not her sister-in-law and full-sitter, but just the icy spider that had tried to cocoon her alive. He had gotten down from the tub, and Cadence scrambled up into the wall, hissing and roaring from a corner. She threw some more webbing at Twilight, but it all melted as the waves of heat coming from Twilight's spell. But the heat was beginning to get to Twilight as well. She was feeling lightheaded, her body struggling with the sudden change from hot to cold. She had to act before the spell made her pass out. There was only one thing she could do. She turned her head, looking to the orange light. She only needed to snuff it, so she did. Levitating some melted snow and ice from the floor, Twilight threw a bucket's worth of water onto the hole where the light had been. The light went out. Then came the scream. It wasn't Cadence screaming, nor was it Twilight. The castle itself sounded as if it was screaming. Every wall, every brick, every grain of dust was screaming in mind-numbing chorus of pain and agony. It was too much. Twilight awoke with a start later, unsure of how much time had passed. She got to her hooves and looked around for Cadence, but found the bath chamber had changed. The ice was gone, and the lights were lit. The bath chamber had regained what Twilight could only guess was its original splendor. More importantly was the warmth. The tub was filled with water, from which trails of steam curled into the air. The faucets on the sink were running as well, pouring hot water and steam. The whole room had a gentle, warm haze to it, and Twilight couldn't help but stretch her wings and smile. After being so cold, the warmth felt good. The only thing out of place was a single candle, which lay on the floor in the far wall. Twilight picked it up with a spell and turned it over. A single candle? Had that been the source of the orange light? It was hard to think the candle alone could be so special, but putting it out had worked. The ice was gone, and so was Cadence. Had Cadence's spider body melted away, or did she flee? Twilight didn't know. She had no hope. Had hope that everything had gone back to normal once she beat Discord's game, got her friends back, and they used the elements of harmony. Yes, she could beat Discord. She was already one step closer. One light down, two to go. Setting the candle onto the edge of the sink, Twilight stood in front of it a moment to draw the warm steam into her lungs. She must not have been able to be asleep long if the warmth felt this good. She let her eyes slide closed. The warmth. It was like being wrapped inside of a nice, safe blanket. She was safe here. She had broken Discord's hold on this part of the castle. She was safe. Or so she thought. Opening her eyes, Twilight felt a pang of panic shoot through her body. She stepped back, eyes fixed on the mirror above the sink. In the thick layer of steam, words had been written. "Do not snuff out the lights, Twilight." Twilight stared at the words, then furrowed her brow. She lifted the mirror off the wall and dropped it to the ground, causing it to shatter into 1,000 pieces. She stared at the shards for a moment, then turned and trotted from the room. As she left, she spoke aloud, as if snapping the spirit of chaos that might be listening in. Rule 3. Smash any mirrors that I find.